The body wasn't supposed to be there, but it was. A coffin, cracked open, a woman inside, mummified by time. Her skin, the color of old parchment. Eyes sunken, lips curled into something that almost resembles a smile. He paused, looked at her, and bent down to kiss her. Not a legend, not a nightmare, but a documented moment in British royal history. This is the story of Catherine of Valois, the queen who was used, silenced, discarded, and finally defiled in death by her own great-grandson. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Because this isn't just history. It's what they tried to bury. If you're drawn to the stories that rot beneath royal crowns, like, subscribe, stay close. What comes next, you won't forget. Paris, 1401. The city reeked of rotting meat, sewage, incense, and war. Inside the royal palace, the tapestries still swayed, the servants still bowed, the gold still gleamed. But beneath all that splendor, madness was king. Literally, King Charles VI of France, Catherine's father, was already deep inside the spiral. Once handsome, beloved, a symbol of France's golden age, until something broke. One day, in the forest, he suffered a psychotic break and slaughtered 4 of his own knights. From that moment forward, he was never the same. He believed his body was made of glass. He wore reinforced clothes to avoid shattering. He banned anyone from touching him, terrified that even a hug might kill him. At court, he'd go days, weeks, without recognizing his wife or his children. Sometimes he'd claim to be someone else entirely. Other times, he'd scream, hurl objects, then vanish into the woods for days on end. And inside that suffocating palace, his children learned to stay silent, still, invisible. One of them was Catherine. She was born into a home where no one was sane and no one was safe. Her mother, Isabeau of Bavaria, offered no comfort. Cold, strategic, politically ruthless. She aligned with her husband's enemies to protect herself and earned a reputation as the Ice Queen. Some whispered she was a traitor. Others claimed she had lovers on both sides of the Civil War. But no one ever claimed. She was a mother. Catherine was raised by servants, nurses, and fear. She wasn't trained to rule. She was trained to survive the chaos of a collapsing dynasty. France was collapsing fast. The kingdom had already split in two, the Armagnacs, loyal to the king, the Burgundians, loyal to power, and both sides treated the royal family like pawns on a blood-soaked chessboard. Catherine didn't have a voice in any of it. She barely had a name in the records. History wasn't watching her, because back then, no one believed she would ever matter. But they were wrong. By the time Catherine reached her teenage years, France was not just a kingdom. It was a battlefield wrapped in silk. Her father's mind was gone. Her mother's name? Poison. The royal house was a rotting carcass picked apart by civil war. The crown no longer symbolized glory. It was a curse. And Catherine? She was in the way. Not important enough to protect. Not dangerous enough to eliminate. She was something far worse in royal politics, useful. Because while France fled, England watched. Its armies sharpened. Its ambition hungry. Enter Henry V, the English king, born with a chip on his shoulder and a sword in his hand. He had already humiliated the French at Agincourt, a massacre so lopsided, French noble blood soaked the mud like spilled wine. But he wanted more than victory. He wanted legitimacy. He wanted the French throne. And in 1420, France did the unthinkable. To preserve what little power they had left, they signed it all away. The Treaty of Troyes, it handed Henry the crown, and handed Catherine with it. She was 18, and this was no love story. It was a transaction, a message. We're so desperate, we'll give you our princess and name you our king. Her family's enemies became her in-laws. The man who had slaughtered her countrymen became her husband. No agency, no consent, just a change in ownership. Catherine sailed across the channel, into enemy territory, wearing the crown of a queen she was never meant to be. England watched her arrival with suspicion, lust, and contempt. Henry V was a cold man, brilliant in battle, disciplined, merciless, but behind palace walls, he treated his bride with the same detachment he gave his troops. She was a symbol, a tool to forge Anglo-French unity. They were married in June. By fall, she was pregnant, and by the following summer, Henry was dead. Dysentery, the disease of armies and excrement, cut him down mid-conquest. He died in France, alone. He left behind a widow, barely 20, and an infant son, Henry of Windsor. That boy would become Henry VI, one of England's most tragic kings. But Catherine? She became something far stranger. Not a queen, not a ruler, not even a widow with sympathy. She became a threat. Catherine of Valois had outlived her husband, but not her prison. In most kingdoms, a royal widow might retreat to a quiet estate. She might remarry, start over, even wield power behind the scenes. But in England, she wasn't seen as a woman. She was seen as a womb, still young, fertile, and capable of creating a rival bloodline. And that terrified the English crown, because her son, infant Henry VI, had just become king, a literal baby on the throne. And if Catherine remarried and bore other children, they could challenge him, split the loyalties of nobles, restart wars. What if her next son is bolder than this one? What if he takes the crown that's already so fragile? So the men in wigs and robes made a decision. They passed a special law just for her. Catherine could not remarry without the king's consent. And the king was her baby, which meant, in effect, Catherine could never marry again. She was royal property, a living relic, locked in status, locked in grief, and worst of all, watched. They moved her out of the main court, stripped her of influence, isolated her. They gave her a small house far from power, servants she didn't choose, a budget she didn't control, no court, no allies, no siblings, no mother, just a child she couldn't raise because even he was taken from her, raised by protectors of the crown. Catherine became a ghost in her own life, not imprisoned in chains, but imprisoned in suspicion. And that's when it happened. In that quiet exile, she met Owen Tudor, a Welsh servant, of noble blood perhaps, but no titles, just a name, just a man. He worked in her household, likely overseeing her wardrobe, nothing more than a shadow passing through her days, until he became something else, a warmth, a defiance, a secret. They fell in love, or at least, they needed each other. No letters survive, no declarations, no diary entries, just rumors and children. She bore at least 4. Some say they married in secret. Some say it was simply an affair, but one that broke every rule of royal purity. Because this was more than adultery, more than love. This was treason of the bloodline. A queen mother mating with a servant. A widow bearing children outside royal control. And those children? They weren't nameless. They would become the root of a dynasty that would drown England in blood. But at this moment, Catherine wasn't thinking of dynasties. She was trying to live, to touch, to be touched, to defy the world that had put her in a glass coffin while she was still breathing. And for that, history punished her. They found out. The whispers grew too loud. A queen, a servant, children born in secrecy. And while the crown couldn't publicly explode, it heightened the noose in silence. Catherine was already off the chessboard. But now they dragged her to the edge of the kingdom. In 1436, she fell ill. We don't know what it was. Maybe a wasting sickness. Maybe something worse. But the reaction was immediate. They didn't call a court physician. They didn't send nobles. They didn't offer comfort. They exiled her again to Bermondsey Abbey, a cold, crumbling religious house in South London, far from court, far from family, far from the man she loved. They called it a retreat. They said it was for her health. But we know what it was, a quiet burial before the death certificate. She died there, in silence, alone. She was just 36, and for a woman who gave birth to kings, her burial was an afterthought. No royal parade, no orchestral masses, no golden tombs, no Latin-laced eulogies. They laid her body in a plain lead coffin and sent it to Westminster Abbey, but never sealed it. Never gave it a monument. Never even a nameplate. Just a coffin, left in the open. Like an object they wanted to forget, but couldn't quite bring themselves to bury. And so, she stayed. Years passed. Decades. Centuries. And Catherine of Valois, Queen of England, mother of a dynasty, became something else. A corpse. Unsealed. Unwatched. On display. Visitors to Westminster saw her. Sometimes hidden behind screens. Sometimes openly revealed during repairs or renovations. Her skin turned yellow-gray. Her features hardened into something unholy, not quite human, not quite gone. And yet, they said she was still beautiful. Some whispered her lips looked soft, that her face hadn't collapsed like the others, that she seemed aware. She had become a relic, a curiosity, a horror exhibit with a crown. And then, it happened. Near the end of the 17th century, the corpse was still there. On a visit to Westminster, a German chronicler named Paul Hentzner recorded something disturbing. He saw her coffin, saw her body, and heard a story from the locals. That Henry VII, her great-grandson, the first Tudor king, the one who owed everything to her bloodline, had kissed her. Her corpse, in the abbey, cold, preserved, exposed. We don't know why. Respect? Madness? Guilt? Maybe he wanted to honor the woman who made him king. Maybe he wanted to feel her power transferred to him. Or maybe he just wanted to see if she'd kiss him back. Catherine of Valois never ruled. She never led armies. She didn't sign treaties. She wasn't remembered as a hero, a queen, or even a woman with a voice. But she birthed one of the most infamous dynasties in history, the Tudors. Her son by Owen Tudor, the forbidden man, the invisible husband, the servant she loved, was Edmund Tudor. Edmund grew up under a cloud of silence. The court didn't speak of his mother. They erased her. But they couldn't erase his blood, because Edmund married a 12-year-old heiress with fire in her bones, Margaret Beaufort. From their union came Henry Tudor, a boy raised in exile, educated in fear, fueled by the myth of his royal claim. That boy would fight for the crown, spill the blood of kings, and crown himself Henry VII, founder of the Tudor dynasty, all because of a woman they tried to erase. Without Catherine, there is no Henry VIII, no Elizabeth I, no break with Rome, no 6 wives, no golden age. But she never lived to see it. She never saw her grandson sit on a throne, never saw the dynasty her body had built. Instead, her remains were manhandled. Her name was forgotten. Her coffin pried open again and again. During church renovations, during tourist visits, even during lootings, they touched her, prodded her, paraded her. Her corpse was left on public display for over 200 years. No guard, no dignity, just cold lead and rotting skin under stained glass windows. A queen turned into a curiosity. It wasn't until the 18th century, after centuries of disrespect, that someone finally said, enough. Her body was moved, placed in a proper sealed tomb, marked at last with something resembling honor. But by then, the damage was done. She had been kissed, desecrated, examined, whispered about, and remembered for all the wrong reasons. Not for her tragedy, not for her suffering, but for how she was handled in death. Catherine of Valois wasn't a conqueror. She wasn't a mastermind. She didn't manipulate power. She simply lived, loved without permission, and was punished for it in life, in law, and in legend. History tried to forget her, but her body refused. Her tomb may be sealed now, but her story? It breathes between the walls of Westminster Abbey. It lingers in the kiss of a king on a mummified corpse. It echoes through every Tudor crown and every queen who lived in a cage she helped build. Catherine of Valois, queen, mother, prisoner, relic, defiled in death, but never truly buried. Catherine of Valois was not just erased, she was handled, haunted, and haunting. And yet, she remains the invisible architect of the Tudor dynasty, the forgotten mother of kings, the defiled queen who lives on in dust, blood, and legend. If this story unsettled you, if it made you question the crowns we celebrate and the bodies we forget, then share it, because history isn't clean, it's bloody, grotesque, and it's never really dead. Subscribe, and come back for more dark historical stories that were never meant to be unearthed.